What happens when the most private betrayal is made terrifyingly public? This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a tale of power, legacy, and the devastating consequences of underestimating a woman who has nothing left to lose. When billionaire media heiress Amara Quince discovered her husband's affair, she didn't just get mad, she got even. She took the mistress's brazen selfie, snapped in the sanctity of her own bedroom, and weaponized it. This is the story of how a single photograph became a declaration of war, splashed across the front page of a newspaper she owned, shattering a family and exposing a world of secrets far darker than a simple affair. The Quince penthouse on Park Avenue wasn't just a home, it was a museum of a dynasty. Spanning the top 2 floors of a limestone monolith, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan. Every object within its walls told a story of power. The imposing Jean-Michel Basquiat in the foyer, the soft gleam of the Baccarat crystal, the hushed weight of antique rugs cushioning a century of secrets. This was the world Amara Quince had been born into, a world her father, the formidable media titan Robert Quince, had built and entrusted to her. She was the steward of his legacy, most notably the New York Chronicle, a newspaper that could make or break careers with a single headline. At 46, Amara was as elegant and formidable as her surroundings. She had her father's sharp intellect and her mother's classic cool beauty. She managed the Quince Media Group with a steady hand, her life a carefully curated masterpiece of board meetings, charity galas, and quiet evenings with her husband of 20 years, Julian Croft. Julian was, by all accounts, the perfect complement to her. A self-made man, a celebrated architect whose sleek, innovative designs had reshaped skylines, he possessed a charm that could disarm the most cynical journalist. He was the warm, approachable half of their power couple, his easy smile a perfect foil to Amara's reserved grace. Theirs was a marriage admired, envied, and deemed unshakable. The first crack in this perfect facade appeared not with a bang, but with a buzz. It was a Tuesday evening. Amara was in her private study, a room paneled in dark cherry wood, reviewing the final proofs for the Chronicle's weekend edition. The city lights twinkled below like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Her phone, lying face down on the polished mahogany desk, vibrated softly. An Instagram notification. She rarely checked it, her social media presence being a carefully managed corporate affair. This, however, was a direct message from a name she vaguely recognized. A younger socialite, someone from the periphery of her circle. The message was brief, almost apologetic. "Amara, I am so sorry to be the one to send this to you. I just thought you should know." Below the text was a screenshot. For a moment, Amara's mind failed to process what she was seeing. The image was hazy, clearly taken on a phone in low light, but the setting was as familiar to her as her own reflection. It was her bedroom, their bedroom. The custom-made headboard, crafted from reclaimed wood from a French vineyard, was unmistakable. So was the faint outline of the Calder mobile that hung near the window, a gift from Julian on their 15th anniversary. But it was the subject of the photo that made the air leave her lungs. A young woman, someone Amara had never seen before, was propped up against their pillows. She was beautiful in a sharp, modern way, with raven hair and a defiant pout. She was wearing nothing but Julian's favorite cashmere V-neck sweater, the gray one Amara had bought him in Scotland. The woman was holding a phone, taking a picture of herself in the mirror on the opposite wall. Her eyes in the reflection were alight with a triumphant gleam. The caption on the original post, visible at the bottom of the screenshot, was 4 simple words: "Where I belong." The name on the account was Sienna Russo. The world tilted. The cherry-paneled walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick and heavy. Every breath was a struggle. Amara's first instinct was a tidal wave of pure, visceral pain. The betrayal was absolute. This wasn't just an affair in some anonymous hotel room. This was a desecration, an invasion. This woman, this stranger, had been in her bed, in her home, touching her things, breathing her air. And Julian had allowed it. He had brought this into their sanctuary. The pain was quickly followed by a cold, clarifying rage. It was an inherited trait, the Quince fury. Her father had been famous for it, a quiet, terrifying anger that could dismantle a man's career in a single chilling sentence. Amara had always kept that part of herself locked away, deeming it too brutal for her carefully constructed life. Now she felt it uncoiling in her chest like a serpent. She stood up, her movements stiff. She walked over to the vast window and looked down at the city that her family had, for generations, helped to inform and shape. The Chronicle was more than a business. It was an instrument of power. Her father had used it to champion causes, expose corruption, and, when necessary, settle scores. He had once told her, "Amara, information is the only currency that matters, and we own the bank." Her mind, honed by years of corporate strategy and crisis management, began to work. The shock receded, replaced by a chilling clarity. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. A messy private divorce was the conventional path. Lawyers, settlements, quiet disgrace. It was what was expected of women in her position, to hide the shame, to preserve a dignified facade. But the sheer audacity of the act demanded a different response. The photograph wasn't a mistake, it was a challenge. A deliberate act of aggression from a mistress who clearly felt secure, and from a husband who had grown careless, arrogant. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her quiet dignity for weakness. They had forgotten who she was. She was not just a wife, she was Amara Quince, and this was her city, her newspaper, her life. She turned from the window, her decision made. The serpent of rage was now fully awake, its cold fire spreading through her veins. This would not be a private matter. A private humiliation demanded a public reckoning. They had brought the battle to her home. She would fight it on her own turf. She picked up her personal phone, the one with the direct, encrypted line to the Chronicle's editor-in-chief, a man named David Chen, whom she trusted implicitly. He was an old-school newsman, nearing retirement, who had worked for her father for 30 years. He answered on the second ring, his voice weary. "Amara, everything all right? It's late." Amara's voice was unnervingly calm, devoid of any emotion. "David, I need you to stop the presses." There was a pause. Stopping the presses was the nuclear option in their world, an act reserved for declarations of war or the death of a president. "What? The weekend edition is already running. It would cost a fortune. What on earth has happened?" Amara walked back to her desk and forwarded the screenshot to his encrypted email. "I'm sending you a file now. I have your new front page." "Your new—" "Amara, what are you talking about?" "The headline, David," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, laced with ice. "I wanted to read, bedtime story, Julian Croft's mistress makes herself at home." There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. David Chen was likely staring at the image on his screen, the one that showed the intimate bedroom of his boss, a woman he respected and admired, desecrated by a stranger. He was a journalist, but he was also a friend. "Amara, my God," he stammered. "You can't. Think about what you're doing. Think about your family. Think about Julian's reputation, your reputation." "I am thinking about it," she replied, the coldness in her voice absolute. "I'm thinking about the fact that my husband's reputation seems to be a matter of public record. So let's make it official." "This is insane," he breathed. "It's professional suicide. It's personal." "It became personal when she took a photo in my bedroom, David," Amara said. "Run the photo. The full, unpixelated image. A 1. Above the fold. No byline. The source is me." "Amara, please, let's talk about this in the morning." "David," she interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "My father hired you because you have ink in your veins and steel in your spine. He trusted you to follow a story to its end. This is the story. Are you going to run it, or do I need to call someone who will?" The threat hung in the air, unspoken but understood. He knew she meant it. He let out a long, defeated sigh. "God help us all, Amara. God help you." "God has nothing to do with this," Amara said before ending the call. She sat in the silence of her study, the city lights a cold and distant audience. She felt strangely hollow, as if she had carved out the part of her that felt pain and left only purpose. Julian was at a dinner engagement for his firm downtown. He would be home in an hour or two, reeking of expensive wine and feigned sincerity. He would kiss her cheek and tell her he missed her. And in the morning, he, along with 8 million other New Yorkers, would wake up to his new reality. He would discover that he had not just broken his wife's heart, he had started a war with a queen, and she was about to burn his kingdom to the ground. The dawn broke over Manhattan with a deceptive serenity, the sky a soft wash of gray and pink. But on the streets below, a firestorm was brewing. It began as a ripple, with the early morning deliveries of the New York Chronicle. Truck drivers, used to headlines about politics or finance, did a double take. Newsstand owners squinted, then read the headline again, their eyes widening in disbelief. By 6 a.m., the city was awake and buzzing. The front page was a masterpiece of brutal simplicity. There, in stark color, was the photo of Sienna Russo. It was larger and clearer than the screenshot, the digital forensics team at the Chronicle having worked through the night to enhance its quality. Every detail was sharp, the smug triumph in her eyes, the distinctive grain of the wooden headboard, the gray cashmere sweater that was so obviously a man's, and the headline in the Chronicle's bold, authoritative font. Bedtime story, Julian Croft's mistress makes herself at home. There was no subheadline, no lengthy article. Just the photo, the headline, and a short, devastatingly factual caption. Sienna Russo, 26, an art gallery curator, pictured in the Park Avenue marital bedroom of celebrated architect Julian Croft and his wife, Quince Media Group CEO Amara Quince. It was a nuclear bomb detonated in the heart of the city's elite. By 7 a.m., it was the only thing anyone was talking about. On trading floors, in coffee shops, in hushed conversations in the back of town cars, the image was being passed around on phones, the story repeated with a mixture of horror and glee. The sheer, audacious cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just journalism, it was vengeance, served cold and in print. Julian Croft woke up at 7:15 a.m. He had come in late, slipping into the guest room, as he often did after a late dinner, to avoid waking Amara. He showered, donned one of his impeccably tailored suits, and stepped out, expecting the quiet hum of his domestic life. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. The apartment was deathly still. No scent of coffee, no sound of the morning news. His phone, which he'd left charging on the hall console, was lit up like a Christmas tree. Dozens of missed calls, a torrent of text messages. "Julian, what the hell is this? Call me." His business partner, Mr. Croft, a statement is urgently needed. His PR firm. "Jay, is this real? Your face is everywhere." A friend. Confused, he walked into the kitchen, and there it was, a single copy of the New York Chronicle, placed squarely in the middle of the marble island. Amara was nowhere to be seen. He stared at the front page, his mind refusing to connect the dots. He saw the photo. He saw Sienna. He saw his bedroom. He saw his name. And then he read the headline. The world dropped out from under him. It was a physical sensation, a lurching in his gut so violent he had to grip the edge of the counter to stay upright. The blood drained from his face. This wasn't possible. It was a nightmare, a prank, a hack. But he knew with a sickening certainty that it was real. Only one person could have orchestrated this. Only one person had the power, the access, and now, clearly, the motive. Amara. He stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He thought of his conversation with Sienna. She had been getting possessive, demanding more of his time, hinting that she wanted to go public. He dismissed it as emotional blackmail, something he could manage. He told her to be patient. He never in his wildest dreams imagined this. And the photo. He remembered her taking selfies that night, giggling about how good she looked in his sweater. He'd been careless, drunk on her youth and his own arrogance. His phone rang again. It was his mother, her voice trembling with panic. "Julian? What is going on? The phone won't stop ringing." He couldn't answer. He hung up and finally looked for Amara. He found her in the formal living room, the one with the Basquiat and the view of Central Park. She was dressed in a sharp, slate-gray business dress, her hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She was standing by the window, a tablet in her hand, calmly scrolling. She looked up as he entered, her eyes as cold and gray as her dress. "Amara," he croaked, his voice a raw whisper. "What have you done?" "I've reported the news," she said, her tone level, almost conversational. "It's what we do." "The news," he roared, finding his voice in a surge of fury. "You call this the news? This is a public execution. You've destroyed me. You've destroyed us." "You are mistaken," she said, setting the tablet down. "You destroyed us when you invited that creature into our bed. I am simply cleaning up the mess. By setting our lives on fire for the whole world to see," he shot back, his hands shaking. "My career is over. My reputation. What about our son? Have you even thought about Alex?" At the mention of their son, a flicker of something, pain, regret, crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I am thinking of him," she said. "I am thinking of the legacy he will one day inherit. A legacy of strength, not one of weakness and public humiliation at the hands of a cheating husband." "So you chose a different kind of humiliation? A bigger one?" he sneered, desperation making him cruel. "You think this makes you look strong? It makes you look like a vengeful, bitter shrew. Everyone is laughing at you, Amara, the scorned wife who owns the newspaper." "Let them laugh," she replied, unmoved. "They are not the ones who matter. The people who matter see this for what it is, a message that the House of Quince does not tolerate betrayal, not in its boardroom and not in its bedroom." He stared at her, truly seeing the woman he had married for the first time in years. The quiet, supportive partner was gone. In her place was the daughter of Robert Quince, a woman forged in corporate fire, and he realized with dawning horror that he had never truly known her. He had seen her power as an accessory to his own life, not as a weapon that could be turned against him. "I will sue you," he spat. "I will sue the newspaper. For defamation. For libel." Amara almost smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "On what grounds, Julian? Is the photograph fake? Is she not your mistress? Were you not in a relationship with her? Did she not take that photo in this house? Every word we printed is the truth, and the truth is an absolute defense. Our lawyers are, shall we say, prepared." He was trapped, utterly and completely trapped. He had no defense, no recourse. She had used the truth as a guillotine. Meanwhile, across town in a small, stylish, but comparatively modest Soho apartment, Sienna Russo was also waking up. Her phone was exploding, but with a different kind of message. Notifications from news sites, friend requests from thousands of strangers, vicious comments on her Instagram, which had somehow been made public. And then, a friend sent her a picture of the Chronicle's front page. Her first reaction was a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had done it. She had forced his hand. The world now knew she existed. She was no longer a secret. This was the first step. The public scandal, the inevitable divorce, and then Julian, free and clear, would come to her. She had won. But as she scrolled through the comments, a cold knot of dread began to form in her stomach. Homewrecker. Disgusting trash. Hope you enjoyed your 15 minutes, you stupid. The vitriol was staggering. She saw her own face, her smug expression plastered everywhere, a symbol of brazen infidelity. She had wanted to be seen, but not like this. She wanted to be the woman who won the powerful man, not the cheap tramp who got caught in his bed. She had intended to control the narrative, perhaps with a leaked story to a sympathetic gossip columnist. She had never anticipated this. This was not a controlled leak. This was a carpet bombing. Amara Quince hadn't just exposed the affair. She had branded her. Her gallery owner called. "Sienna," he said, his voice cold, "I think it's best you don't come in today, or ever. We're being inundated with calls. Our patrons are conservative. Your association is no longer tenable." Her triumph curdled into panic. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. The final, most painful blow of the morning came from halfway across the country at Stanford University. Alex Croft, a 20-year-old economics major, was walking to class when his friend showed him the headline on his phone. He saw his father's name. He saw the word Mistress, and he saw a picture taken in his mother's bedroom. The world swam. The shame was instant and overwhelming. This wasn't some anonymous celebrity scandal. This was his family, his home. His mother, the most private, dignified person he knew, had done this. He fled to his dorm room, his heart pounding, and called her. "Mom?" he said, his voice choked with a mixture of anger and anguish. "What did you do? Why would you do this?" Amara, still in the living room with Julian, answered the call. Her steely composure finally cracked. Hearing her son's pain was the one thing that could pierce her armor. "Alex," she began, her voice softer. The whole world is seeing this. My friends are seeing this. They're looking at me. They feel sorry for me. You put our family, our private pain, on the front page of a newspaper." "He did this, Alex," she said, her voice hardening again as she looked at Julian. "Your father brought this on us." "And you made it a circus," he cried. "Couldn't you have just, I don't know, divorced him? Why did you have to blow up the whole world?" Before she could answer, he hung up. Amara stood in the silence, the sound of her son's accusation echoing in her ears. She looked at Julian, who was watching her with a sort of broken, bitter satisfaction. For the first time that morning, she felt the cost of her victory. She had won the battle, but the collateral damage was immense, and she was beginning to suspect that the war was far from over. This single act of revenge had set in motion a chain of events that she could no longer control. The days following the publication were a slow-motion car crash. The story had a life of its own now, a ravenous entity feeding on speculation and schadenfreude. Rival newspapers and gossip sites dug deeper, unearthing every detail they could about the curator and the architect. Sienna Russo's past was dissected, her social media mined for any hint of her relationship with Julian. Julian, for his part, became a pariah. He was forced to take an indefinite leave of absence from his own firm, Croft and Associates. The board, facing pressure from clients who didn't want their multi-million-dollar projects associated with such a sordid scandal, had all but pushed him out. He was radioactive. Julian retreated to a friend's vacant apartment downtown, a ghost in his own life. The calls he made were to lawyers, discussing the grim mechanics of a divorce that was now a certainty. Every conversation was a reminder of what he had lost: his wife, his son's respect, his career, and, he was quickly discovering, his financial independence. Amara, in contrast, presented a facade of unbreakable strength. She went to her office at the Quince Media Group every day, attended every meeting, and made every decision with her usual incisive intelligence. Her staff watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. They had always respected her, but now she seemed almost mythical, a figure of corporate folklore. The woman who had put her own cheating husband on the front page. No one dared to cross her, but beneath the surface, Amara was navigating a private hell. Her son Alex refused to speak to either of her or Julian. Her nights were sleepless, the silence of the vast penthouse a constant reminder of her fractured family. The victory felt hollow, the revenge a bitter ash in her mouth. The first major twist, the one that shifted the entire game, came from an unlikely source: Marcus Thorne, the Quince family's long-serving chief legal counsel. He was a quiet, meticulous man in his late 60s, more a conciliere than a simple lawyer. He had been a friend of Amara's father and had watched her grow up. He requested an urgent, off-the-books meeting a week after the headline. He met her not in the office, but in the hushed, anonymous grandeur of the Frick collection. "Amara," he began, his face grim as they stood before a Rembrandt portrait, "the scandal has created unforeseen ripples. Your decision, while bold, has drawn a great deal of attention to Julian's financial affairs." "What about them?" Amara asked, her focus still on the painting. "Standard procedure in a high-profile divorce is a full asset disclosure," Marcus said. "I've started the preliminary work, and I've found something troubling. Very troubling." He handed her a slim file. Julian co-founded his firm with significant seed money. We all thought it was from his early successes. It wasn't. The initial capital, almost $10 million, came from an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands, Orion Holdings. Amara frowned. "I don't know it." "Neither did I," Marcus said grimly. Because it's a shell corporation, and the money wasn't his. He was leveraged, heavily, and worse. Over the past 5 years, he has been using his shares in Croft and Associates, shares that are marital property, by the way, as collateral against a series of increasingly desperate loans from the same entity. Amara's blood ran cold. Loans for what? That's the mystery. His firm is successful. There's no business reason for it. This is personal debt, and he's defaulted on the most recent payment. The timing suggests he was counting on a contract that fell through. Marcus paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. Whoever Orion Holdings is, they don't just own a piece of his firm. With this default, they effectively own him. And by extension, they have a claim on half of your marital assets tied up in his company. The affair, the betrayal, it all suddenly seemed like a childish squabble compared to this. This was about the Quince legacy. This was a threat to the empire her father had built. Find out who is behind Orion Holdings, Amara commanded, her voice low and dangerous. Use every resource we have. The investigative team at the Chronicle, private investigators, whatever it takes. As Amara's team began to dig into the shadowy world of offshore finance, another player made a move. Sienna Russo, now unemployed and infamous, realized that her victimhood could be a commodity. Her initial attempts to sell a tell-all story had been met with lukewarm offers. She was yesterday's news. She needed new leverage, and she realized she might have it. During her time with Julian, he had often been careless, taking calls and leaving documents on his desk in the apartment he kept for their trysts. He'd been stressed, preoccupied, talking in hushed tones about making his obligations and the pressure from Orion. At the time, she'd paid little attention. Now, those fragments of conversation seemed vital. She also remembered seeing a name on some of his correspondence. Alistair Finch. Alistair Finch. The name was a jolt to Amara when her investigators brought it up a few days later. Finch was a ruthless British private equity magnate, a corporate raider known for hostile takeovers. He was also Amara's chief rival, the owner of a competing media conglomerate who had been trying to buy out the Chronicle for years. Her father had despised him, calling him a vulture who mistakes destruction for creation. The pieces began to click into place with terrifying speed. Alistair Finch was the money and the power behind Orion Holdings. This wasn't just about a business loan. It was a long, patient, and utterly diabolical plan. Finch had seeded Julian's company from the very beginning, making him dependent. He had waited for the perfect moment of vulnerability to call in the debt. He wasn't just trying to bankrupt Julian. He was trying to gain leverage over Amara. By controlling her husband's debt, he controlled a significant marital asset. In the ensuing divorce, he could lay claim to a stake in Quince Media Group itself, or at the very least, force a fire sale of assets. The affair wasn't the cause of the crisis. It was merely the trigger that had sprung the trap. Julian hadn't just been a fool in love. He'd been a pawn in a billionaire's chess game. His affair with Sienna, his carelessness, his public disgrace. It was all the perfect storm Finch had been waiting for. Amara felt a surge of rage so profound it almost blinded her. She had been played. They all had. Julian, for all his sins, was a fly caught in a web he couldn't comprehend. Sienna was a pawn, and she, Amara, was the ultimate prize. Finch's plan was brilliant in its cruelty. He had used her own marriage as a weapon against her. She needed to speak to the one person who might have seen the gears of this machine up close. She needed to speak to Sienna Russo. The meeting was arranged through back channels in the empty, echoing space of a closed-down restaurant in Tribeca that Amara owned. It was a neutral, private ground. Sienna arrived looking nervous but defiant. The past few weeks had stripped her of her smug confidence, replacing it with a hard-edged wariness. Amara didn't waste time with pleasantries. She sat in a booth, a lone glass of water before her. "You thought you were playing Julian," Amara began, her voice calm. "You were wrong. You were both being played," Sienna scoffed. "By you, you mean? You're the one who ruined my life." "My actions were a response to yours," Amara stated coolly. "They were checkers. I am now in a game of chess, and I find that you are, inadvertently, a piece on my side of the board. I need to know everything Julian said about Alistair Finch and Orion Holdings." Sienna's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the name. She had leverage, after all. "What's in it for me?" she asked, her voice regaining some of its old confidence. "My reputation is destroyed. I can't get a job. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," Amara countered, her gaze unwavering. "You made a transactional relationship with my husband. You are now going to make one with me. You give me the information I need. Every detail, every name, every overheard whisper. In exchange, I will give you a new life." Sienna hesitated. "What kind of new life?" $250,000 wired to an account of your choosing, a one-way first-class ticket to any city in the world, and a clean slate. In return, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight that if you ever speak the names Quince, Croft, or Finch again, you will be penniless for the rest of your life, and you will disappear. You came into my world looking for a payday. This is it. Take the deal, or walk away with nothing and face Alistair Finch's displeasure alone. I assure you, my public revenge is far kinder than his private version." Sienna looked at the woman across the table. She saw no hint of the scorned wife from the tabloids. She saw a commander, a strategist offering a brutal but clean exit from a war she was not equipped to fight. The choice was obvious. For the next hour, Sienna talked. She recounted hushed phone calls, panicked meetings Julian had taken, and his growing terror of his investor. She confirmed that Julian's relationship with Finch was one of absolute fear. He was a puppet who had just had his strings cut. When Sienna left, with the promise of a new life in Florence and $250,000, Amara sat alone in the silent restaurant. She now had the full picture. Her husband's infidelity, her own spectacular revenge, the public scandal. It was all just the opening act. The real war was against Alistair Finch, a man who had tried to use her family's private pain for his corporate gain. She had unleashed a media firestorm to punish her husband. Now she would have to harness that same power to save her empire. The front page of the Chronicle had been her weapon of revenge. Now it would become her shield and her sword. The story wasn't over. It had just begun. The battle lines were drawn, etched not in sand but in the cold, hard currency of power and reputation. On one side stood Alistair Finch, a predator armed with financial leverage, legions of ruthless lawyers, and a complete lack of scruples. On the other was Amara Quince, armed with the unvarnished truth, a media empire, and a cold, calculated fury that had been honed to a razor's edge by betrayal. The battlefield was no longer the court of public opinion, where gossip reigned. It had shifted to the unforgiving arena of corporate warfare. Amara, guided by the meticulous Marcus Thorne and her top investigative reporter from the Chronicle, a bulldog of a man named Ben Carter, worked with a chilling efficiency that left her team in awe. Sienna Russo's testimony had provided the human narrative, a vivid tapestry of Julian's growing fear and desperation. The financial forensics team, working in a secure, locked-down section of the VMG building, had painstakingly traced the flow of money from Finch's known entities through a labyrinth of shell corporations in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Liechtenstein. The trail always, inevitably, led back to Orion Holdings. They had the evidence, a clear, damning pattern of predatory lending and corporate espionage designed for a single audacious purpose: to seize control of Julian Croft's assets and, through them, launch a Trojan horse attack on Quince Media Group itself. The trap Finch had so brilliantly set was that any conventional move Amara made would result in his victory. If she quietly paid off Julian's monumental debt to protect the sanctity of their marital assets, Finch would walk away with a staggering profit, rewarding his villainy. If she allowed Julian's company and its associated debts to fall into Finch's hands during the divorce proceedings, Finch would become a significant minority power in her life, a cancerous presence she could never excise, potentially forcing a fire sale of VMG assets to satisfy his claims. He had constructed what he believed to be a perfect checkmate, but Alistair Finch, like Julian before him, had made a critical, fatal error. He had fundamentally misunderstood his opponent. He saw Amara as an heiress, a socialite CEO who had inherited her power. He did not see her as her father's daughter, a born fighter who understood the fundamental Quince doctrine: The best defense is a devastating, overwhelming offense. She convened her war council in her father's old study, a room she had rarely used, but one that felt appropriate for the gravity of their situation. The air smelled of old leather and legacy. Marcus Thorne, David Chen, and Ben Carter sat around the heavy mahogany table, looking at the mountain of evidence laid before them. "We have two options," Amara stated, her voice resonating with a newfound authority. She didn't pace. She stood at the head of the table, commanding the room. "Option one is the path of lawyers. We fight Finch in the dark alleys he loves. We file motions, countersuits. It will be a long, bloody, and private war of attrition. He has the resources to drag it out for years, bleeding us with legal fees. In the process, my family's name, Julian's profound stupidity, and the details of our entire life will be dredged up and dissected in depositions. He wants that war of inches. He would win." She paused, her gaze sweeping over each man, ensuring she had their absolute attention. "Option two," she continued, a dangerous glint in her eye, "is the Quince route." David Chen, the veteran editor who had been so horrified by her initial command weeks ago, now looked at her with a grim, almost fearful respect. "You want to publish," he said. It wasn't a question. "Everything," Amara confirmed. "Every last piece of it, but not as a sordid follow-up to the affair. We frame it as what it truly is, a major financial investigation, a public service. The headline will be something like, 'The Finch Trap: How British Raider Alistair Finch Uses Predatory Debt to Weaponize Private Lives.' We expose the entire mechanism, the shell corporations, the systematic targeting of Julian as a proxy, the ultimate goal of infiltrating this company. We lay it all bare for the world to see." The silence that followed was heavy with risk. Marcus Thorne, ever the voice of caution, finally broke it. "Amara, with all due respect, this is madness. He will sue us into oblivion. He is not Julian Croft. He has armies of lawyers who specialize in this. They will claim very convincingly that this is a personal vendetta, that you are abusing your media empire to fight your divorce battles in public. We could be tied up in litigation that could genuinely threaten the paper." Ben Carter, the reporter, chimed in. "He's right, Amara. From a journalistic standpoint, we have to be bulletproof. Finch will use every tool at his disposal to discredit us, to paint you as an unhinged, scorned woman. He will attack the source, you." Amara listened patiently, nodding. "You are both absolutely right. He will do all of those things. And that is precisely why this will work," she said, her logic sharp and cold. "You are looking at the board as it stands. I am telling you how we flip the entire table. He wants to fight me in the shadows. I will force him to fight me in the sunlight. When he sues us, he is not suing a scorned wife. He is suing the New York Chronicle for publishing a meticulously researched and documented piece of investigative journalism. He will have to prove in open court that his financial dealings are legitimate. He will be subject to discovery. His entire empire, which has been built in the murky depths of offshore secrecy, will be dragged kicking and screaming into the light. He is a predator who thrives in darkness. We are going to turn on every single floodlight on the eastern seaboard." It was a breathtakingly audacious gamble. She was daring him to engage in mutually assured destruction, knowing that he had far more to lose from transparency than she did. "There is one final piece," she concluded, her voice softening slightly. "The linchpin, Julian." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Julian was a public disgrace, a pariah. "His testimony is the human heart of this financial story," Amara explained. "It corroborates everything. We have the what, but he provides the how and the why. I need a signed affidavit from him, a full on-the-record confession of his dealings with Finch." "And you think he'll just give it to you?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "After you put him on the global stage as a cheater?" "I don't know," Amara admitted honestly, "but he is the father of my son, and he is a man who has lost everything. The one thing he may still have a desire to reclaim is a shred of his dignity. I'm going to offer him that chance." Doing something she never thought she would do again, Amara went to him. The doorman at the sterile glass and steel building downtown looked at her with pity as he let her up. The apartment Julian was borrowing was a minimalist nightmare of white walls and chrome furniture, a place with no history and no soul. It smelled of stale air and defeat. She found him in the living area, staring out the window. He was a shadow of his former self. The charismatic swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed emptiness. He'd lost weight, and his expensive suit hung on him, making him look like a boy playing dress-up. He turned as she entered, his expression devoid of the anger from their last confrontation. It was worse. It was apathy. "Have you come to survey the ruins?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "I've come to offer you a choice," she said, foregoing any prelude. She didn't sit. She placed a thick legal file on the glass coffee table between them. "I know everything, Julian. About Alistair Finch, Orion Holdings, the loans, the trap he set for you, for us." She watched as he listened, his expression shifting through a kaleidoscope of emotions, from weary confusion to dawning horror, and finally to a pathetic, impotent flicker of rage. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. "That bastard," he whispered, the words muffled. "All of it. He was playing me from the start." "Yes," Amara said, her voice clinical, not accusatory. "He played us all, and now I am going to end the game. I am preparing a story for the Chronicle. We're going to publish everything." Julian looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're insane. He'll destroy you." "He's not like me, Amara. He's a killer." "I am aware," she said, "but the story is infinitely stronger with your cooperation. I need your voice. Your testimony will be the nail in his coffin." She slid a single document and a pen across the table. "I need you to sign this affidavit, detailing everything. Every conversation, every threat, every payment." He stared at the pen as if it were a snake. A bitter, broken laugh escaped his lips. "And why in God's name would I do that? To help you? The woman who publicly annihilated me? You took my life and set it on fire." "I did," she acknowledged, her voice softening for the first time, not with pity, but with a cold, hard truth. "I took the life you were living. Now I am offering you a chance to build a new one. Right now your legacy, the story that will be told to our grandchildren, is that of a fool and a cheat who was brought down by a cheap affair. This," she tapped the affidavit, "is your one and only chance to change that narrative. You can be the man who was duped and preyed upon, but who, in the end, did the right thing. The man who stood up and helped expose a true villain to protect his family. You can be a tragic figure, but a brave one." She pushed the pen closer to him. "Or you can be the coward who hid in a borrowed apartment while his wife fought the dragon he invited into their lives. The choice is yours, Julian. Define how you will be remembered. This is the last and most important choice you will ever get." He looked from the pen to her face, searching her eyes. He saw no lingering affection, but he also saw no malice. He saw a general giving a soldier a chance to die honorably on the battlefield rather than by a firing squad. With a shaking hand, he took the pen. 3 days later, the Sunday edition of the New York Chronicle landed on doorsteps with a palpable thud. The headline was a masterpiece of declarative journalism, consuming the top half of the front page. "The Finch Trap. An investigation into predatory finance, corporate espionage, and the weaponization of private lives." The story that followed was a tour de force, a multi-page, meticulously researched exposé, complete with flowcharts mapping Finch's shell corporations, damning excerpts from his aggressive loan agreements, and incisive sidebars on his long history as a corporate raider. And at its heart, displayed with devastating clarity, was a scanned copy of the full, signed affidavit from Julian Croft. The effect was instantaneous and seismic. It detonated in newsrooms and boardrooms, from New York to London to Hong Kong. The story was picked up globally, not as a piece of society gossip, but as a major financial bombshell. Finch's investors, who had long turned a blind eye to his methods, grew terrified. Regulators in both the US and the UK, who had long been suspicious, suddenly had the public mandate and the hard evidence to open sweeping formal investigations. Finch, as predicted, came out swinging. His PR machine went into overdrive. He filed a staggering billion-dollar lawsuit against the Chronicle for defamation. He appeared on a rival news network, his face a mask of patrician outrage, calling Amara a deranged and vindictive woman abusing her father's newspaper to settle a personal score. It was a fatal miscalculation. Amara, by publishing Julian's confession alongside the hard data, had brilliantly framed the narrative. She was not just a wife seeking revenge, she was a CEO defending her company against a documented hostile attack. Finch's angry denials made him look guilty, his lawsuit a desperate attempt to silence the truth. The floodlight she had switched on was too bright. Finch's lawsuit faltered in the pre-trial stage as the discovery process, which he had inadvertently initiated, began to unearth even more of his sordid dealings. His partners and investors, terrified of the legal and financial exposure, began to abandon him in droves. His empire, built on shadows and fear, could not withstand the harsh glare of public scrutiny. It began to crumble, not in a single crash, but in a cascade of failures. 6 months later, Alistair Finch was finished. He was forced to resign from his own firm under a cloud of scandal, liquidating personal and corporate assets to cover his mounting legal fees and settle with furious investors. He was a ruined man, a king deposed. The divorce between Amara and Julian proceeded with a quiet, somber dignity. There was little left to fight over. Julian, as part of his cooperation, had willingly signed away his claims to VMG and most of their shared assets. He left New York without a word, a disgraced but free man, with just enough capital to start over somewhere anonymous and quiet. Amara stood alone at the helm of her empire, more powerful and respected than ever before. She had faced the ultimate personal betrayal and a catastrophic corporate threat and had emerged victorious. But the victory was not without its scars. Her marriage was a memory, her family indelibly fractured. One evening, months later, as the first snow of winter fell on the city, her son Alex called her. "I read all the articles, Mom," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I had a professor in my corporate ethics class use it as a case study. I finally understand what you were doing and why. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you." Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in Amara's eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. They were not tears of sadness or anger, but of a profound, aching relief. The one judgment that had ever truly mattered had been rendered in her favor. "But I have to ask," Alex continued, a genuine curiosity in his tone. "That first front page, the one about Dad and her, was that part of the plan too? Was that the first move against Finch?" Amara looked out at the city lights, a glittering kingdom she had fought so hard to protect. "No," she admitted, her voice a soft, honest whisper. "That wasn't strategy. That wasn't for the company. That wasn't for Finch." A small, sad but resolute smile touched her lips. "That was for me." She had won the war, saved her legacy, and, in the end, earned back her son. The glass house had been shattered, but in its place she had built a fortress of steel and ink, a throne of her own magnificent, painful design. Amara Quince's story is a chilling reminder that in the world of the powerful, love, business, and betrayal are often tragically intertwined. She took a moment of profound personal humiliation and forged it into a weapon, not just for revenge, but for the very survival of her legacy. It forces us to ask, what would you do with that kind of power? When pushed to the absolute limit, would you choose quiet dignity or spectacular, world-altering retribution? If this story of high-stakes drama and calculated justice captivated you, show your support by hitting that like button. It tells us you want more tales of complex characters and unthinkable choices. Share this video with anyone who loves a story where the tables aren't just turned, they're completely shattered. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we uncover from the shadows.